Warm welcome to our session today. In our session today, we are going to provide you a practical overview of the routes to reimbursement in France and beyond. In this session, our panel will discuss case studies and challenges for the reimbursement of vascular and wound care devices, and you'll get to understand the key requirements for gaining reimbursement. My name is Edmund White, Chief Commercial Officer at Equivar MedTech, and we'll be moderating our session today. If you have questions during the session, please enter them into the question panel chat box on the right side of the screen, and we will look to address them during the Q&A session. I would now like to introduce you to our distinguished panel. Professor Jan Goffik is a vascular surgeon at the Vascular Center Group Saint-Joseph, Paris, with over 20 years of experience performing endovascular and open procedures for arterial disease. He is president of the clinical trial unit at Groupe Hospitalier Paris Saint-Joseph. His clinical interests include lower extremity arterial disease, endovascular revascularization, wound healing, and amputation prevention. He has performed numerous studies in these areas and authored numerous peer-reviewed original and review articles, and is a scientific board member at Equivar, referent for endovascular and open procedures for peripheral arterial diseases. A warm welcome to Professor Jan Goffik. I'd also like to introduce you to Professor Luc Théot. He is the head of the Burns and Wound Healing Unit of Montpellier University Hospital in France. He has authored over 100 publications and an editorial board member of 8 journals and former president of the World Union of Wound Healing Societies and the European Tissue Repair Society. He teaches as professor at the University of Montpellier, Nantes, Limoges, Antalya, and La Réunion. His passion for wound healing and scarring has led him to organize international conferences like Scar Club and the International Workshop on Wound Technology. He's qualified in general orthopedic and plastic surgery. A warm welcome to you, Professor Luc Théot. So the floor is yours.
When you develop a medical device, you have to follow different steps. First of all, the conception and the development, which is most of the time the time for brainstorming, for having a startup and developing the practical aspect, I would say. Then you go for what is absolutely mandatory in France, which is a CE mark. And you need to build your CE mark trial, and more it becomes more difficult. So this trial is considered by most of the experts as a step, a preliminary step for the next step, which is a demonstration of the added value, because you have to convince the commission that you bring something really new in terms of added value, and you have to compare with already existing solutions. Once you got, and this is maybe the most difficult moment, and Professor Goffik will come back on that, how to work on the methodology in order to get the best possible result in your randomized control trial. Then you have to determine with another commission which pricing is it, and how much you want to sell it, and how much the French government can pay for that. Then you have a kind of proof of efficacy to come on the market. When you are reimbursed, it's easy. When you're not yet reimbursed, it's a little bit more complex, and some steps and we will develop that in this presentation. The reevaluation linked to the CE mark has to be done every 5 years. So every 5 years you will be asked to redo some part of the work. Next. So the first commission is called CNEDIMS, which is a very complex signification, but it serves 2 major interests. First, the product interest, because we assess the place of the strategy and the therapeutic effect of this medical device, and a public health interest by evaluating the impact on the population, on the response to a therapeutic need, and the organization of care. So CNEDIM's assessment is based on a very rigorous analysis of clinical data from clinical investigations. And these investigations must respond to the manufacturer's ASA claims in a scientific, robust, and relevant manner, which is maybe complex for some parts of the medical device, especially for dressings. And I will come back on that also. So a scientific assessment of the clinical data from clinical investigation which is medical-based evidence. And the French government is one of the most difficult to convince in terms of medical-based evidence. The gold standard, of course, is randomized double-blind clinical investigations, cost a lot of money, and in some when the ratio between the benefit and the cost of the RCT is too high, some companies will have difficulties to cover that. So in case of insufficient medical-based evidence, the request for reimbursement might be rejected. Next, please. So hospital or clinic, single use at healthcare institute. If the cost is managed by the hospital, it's called prestation of hospitalization. We can have the GSS package, which is a direct access agreed by the healthcare institute after manufacturer response to a call for the tender. And the price coverage is a flat rate. Intra-GSS list, high risk of invasive MD and under high health surveillance, high cost, which are defined by ministerial decree. Cost managed by French health insurance, registry on list of reimbursable health services and products, divided into 5 titles, 1 to 5, which represent the types of the DM. LPP, it's a generic line or brand name, and LPP Plus is very expensive and innovative MDs that will be covered in addition to hospitalization benefits on so-called extra list. In practice, there are the MDs of Title 3 and 5 of the LPP. Next, please. So, general overview, actors and system review. The cover Autorité de Santé, the high authority of health. The Canadians, we spoke about that, Commission nationale d'évaluation des dispositifs médicaux et des techniques de santé. It's a branch of the HAS. CEPS is for pricing and determining how much you can pay and how much you want to be paid, with folders in 3 parts: 1, identification; 2, medical technique, and the third one, medical echo, is reviewed by the CPS. 180 days and it's available for 5 to 10 years. Next. The Canadians will give an opinion on added value. Added value is expected. So the improvement of the added value is really is classified into 5 levels. No improvement for ASA 5, minor, moderate, significant, and major for ASA 1. So SA on ASA 1 to 5 is a balanced benefit risk for the patient. Indication for the DM is very important, and it's defined by the randomized control trial most of the time. The condition of prescription and use, the impact on the health system, the target population, and the assessment analyzes the benefit ratio for the patient and relies on clinical scientific evidence to determine the added value. So this is the second story. The ADAP can push down. Next. So yeah, the leverage of your request is either a probatory reimbursement, which is a temporary reimbursement, CE mark, not supported, LPP registration less than 12 months, cumulative conditions, serious rare disease, no comparator, improvement, innovation, or relevant clinical efficacy with a good ratio. Forfait innovation package, which is quite new, and Professor Griffith will come back on that. It's a CE mark, novelty, early phase of dissemination, characterization of risks, clinical study available, evaluation of the clinical investigation project. It's temporary, I would say. And early HAS meeting, which has been determined a little bit like the food and drugs. Some years ago, they decided to have an early meeting, which is trying to understand what is expected from the HS and what you can do in the medical device you want to promote. Next. What about the other European countries? If we compare, there are different, discrepancies, I would say. In UK, there is drug tariff. It's more easy to enter, but it's an unstable position a long time because if you're not used, if the patient is not using this new medical device, it will be pushed out next year. So it's good for the nurse, but it depends on the real patient interest, I would say, and the use of this medical device. In Italy, it's complex because it's region dependent. Some medical devices are reimbursed in Sicily and not reimbursed in Lombardy, or the reverse. So it's quite heterogeneous situation. In Germany, it's very similar to France, but it's more physician related, prescription by the physician. And in Spain, concerning the wound healing domain, there is no privateness. It's more on haciendas, which are spread into different zones, and the dressing from more low prices. You have to go to the hospital to get a very high level medical devices available. I think next is, then I give the speech to Jan.
Thank you, Luc, for this overview of the reimbursement system and pathway in France. If you come back to France, in fact, and we look the system, it's mainly based on evidence-based medicine to obtain the reimbursement. And probably according some EMEA responsibles across Europe, it's probably that this pathway could be enlarged to more European countries. And so it will be, as you said, perhaps more difficult to obtain in Europe some reimbursement. In fact, not more difficult, but you should provide more and more evidence and strong evidence. Also, the gold standard is to obtain from the Canadians and the CPS the reimbursement, but you should know also that there are other pathways to obtain some temporary reimbursement from some devices, but not just devices, also for different kind of healthcare. First, we have the forfait innovation, so innovation funding. It allows exceptional and temporary reimbursement for an innovative medical devices or procedures subject to the performance of a study to provide missing clinical or medico-economic data. So it should be very innovative. We have also some temporary coverage. It's articles NL165. And so I think that this temporary coverage has been made, in fact, to cover a gap with Germany. I don't know if you agree, Luc, with that.
Yeah. And even in US, you have what they call probatory coverage. The main principle is that the company is allowed to be reimbursed for the medical device, but the company has to prove by a solid randomized control trial that this is really a medical device which can be supported, I would say, reimbursed.
And it's a good deal because during 2 or 3 years, you have the reimbursement of the devices, but during this period, the company should provide data to the government, to the healthcare authority, to maintain, in fact, this reimbursement. So I think it's a good deal. We have also the Article 51, and Luc, you are the best person to speak about it because you obtained this Article 51 a few years ago. Perhaps you...
Yeah, it's specific. It's new because it was built in 2018, and it's a pocket of money for innovation. Innovation in terms of organization of care, providing some medical devices included in these new organizations. For instance, devices on telemedicine, devices on telesurveillance. Telesurveillance is something very new. So there is a investment from the government into some teams who will have 1, 2, 3, 4 years to provide enough data and it's a step towards generalization. Means if you get a good Article 51, and if your study brings evidence that you can you can convince other regions in the same country, in France, that your organization and the medical device you use are better than before, then you will get a kind of a global reimbursement. It's a lump sum. It's more lump sum into which you include different items.
And finally, you have the ETAP program, and this program is dedicated to provide funding for remote monitoring projects. So, in fact, when you get the reimbursement, you have different way, in fact, to get the reimbursement. The price of the product could be included in the DRG, and so the hospital should pay for it. But also, you have some extra DRG reimbursement, and so it's a LPPR list. And for cardiovascular devices, is mainly related to the type 3 and type 5 from the LPPR list. And so this list is a list of product, but not just product, it could be also services qualifying for a reimbursement by the French National Health Insurance Chain. And it allows reimbursement of medical devices for individual use in a private practicing setting or of some devices, and reimburse outside of DRG in healthcare organization. So, as I said, we have for the cardiovascular devices, we have mainly type 3 and type 5. In fact, we have type 5 only from 2017, and it has been developed mainly for DCB, but also it could be for other kind of devices, because these devices in type 5 are not implantable. What we should also stress that since June 2019, so the company have been required to obtain an individual code to identify, in fact, their reimbursed product. And so they have to provide this information to the AS. So the main point to get the reimbursement is to provide data, and to provide data, you should have some data, not just some clinical data, but you should first to obtain some pre-clinical data about the technology development, about testing, and we also see more and more different kind of tests, pre-clinical tests to obtain this data, not just in animals. We have also other way by numerical assessment to obtain this data. And then you have the clinical phase. Usually we have some feasibility, the first-in-man study, for example, or such as a pilot study to obtain first assessment. And in some cases, you can obtain the CE mark from these feasibility studies. And then you have the clinical benefit studies, in fact, the usual RCT. And you design the study to raise, in fact, the evidence. And so here is the key of the system, which kind of evidence you should raise to obtain the reimbursement. So far, the study should obtain, in fact, should show the clinical added value, CEV. And this clinical added value is provided by the PDIMS that give its opinion on the assessment of the clinical added value. You should know also that the clinical added value level is one of the criteria used by the CPS to determine the cost of the reimbursement of the devices. And as we said previously, we have 5 levels of the clinical added value. So coming back to the design of the study, the gold standard so far is the RCT, the randomized clinical trial, to obtain this evidence. We have different kind of design. It could be a superiority design. It could be also equivalence of non-inferiority studies. And so far, it is the best methodology to show the advantage and the clinical value of the product. But also, we should know that more and more we have some prospective registry of high level, and using this registry, you can obtain also very good evidence to support some dossier. And in some cases, I think that you have some example, Luc. But in some cases, it's difficult to set up RCT because the population is not easy to randomize. And in some cases, a high-level registry could provide this evidence. What do you think, Luc, about it?
Well, you're perfectly right. In our domain, the level of comorbidities is so high that, for instance, in pressure ulcers, it's nobody wants to go inside. So no company want to invest on a study which would present a very high risk of failure. So people are concentrating more on diabetic foot ulcer, which are of high value because this is a pathology which impacts seriously some lethal issues, I would say. And on leg ulcers, because in leg ulcers it's a very chronic situation into which recurrence after healing is very high. So this sometimes it's so difficult to get the primary objective well defined in the randomized control trial that you have to concentrate also on secondary objectives, which sometimes are well arguments to induce a reimbursement, at least for a minimal reimbursement. So the methodology of the RCT is quite complex in wound healing and need a protocolist who knows perfectly wound healing, who knows the dressings, who knows. For instance, the best evidence we could get with a French company called Urgo was took a lot of time on a product which was delivering anti-metalloproteases, and but finally the investment was good because it was published in the Lancet some years ago, and the company can obtain a good price with a CPS. So yeah, it's a balance. It's a complex game.
So anyway, if you perform a registry RCT, you should also define a primary endpoint.
Yeah.
You have to think about it because you should show using this primary endpoint the clinical value of your devices, of your technique, of your strategy. Also, it should be accessible. You should make it, and so you should choose the right endpoint to show the difference, but also with less patients. And if you choose two more complex endpoint, and you should achieve with 1,000 patients per group, it could be very complicated and costly. And so think about the endpoint is very important before setting the study. Another kind of setup is the target population. And so because when you conclude an RCT, you conclude about a patient with fit with the inclusion and exclusion criteria of this study. And so to think about the population is very important. And the first temptation, in fact, is to have a wide population. But often, if you have a too heterogeneous population, it's very difficult to show the difference between group and the effectiveness of the devices. On the contrary, you have to decrease the number of patients to decrease, in fact, the population, but at the same time, the conclusion is just for few people, perhaps, not enough patients. But what we learn, perhaps it's not so bad to start with a niche. Why? First, because you can show easily the difference between the control and the experimental arm. And then you can enlarge the indication. I think one of the best example could be the TAVI, either for the interventional cardiology. They start only with patients with contraindication for open surgery. And now we know what happened. It's indicated for many patients, most of the population. And so think to start by a niche and then to enlarge. I have also another example, but it's a bad example. It's renal denervation. With the renal denervation, they start with the wide population, and they never succeed to show difference using the denervation devices. But at the same time, we know if you target a good population, these devices works. So again, it will be simple perhaps to start with a niche and then to enlarge the population to show the efficacy of the devices. So now we are going to show you some example about devices. Perhaps we can start with the negative pressure wound therapy. Luc?
Yeah, especially we had this problem of the big machines with foam inside the wound, quite invasive. And even if the clinical benefit was very important, the authorities were a little bit reluctant to provide a large reimbursement, especially for well, if this negative pressure could be delivered at home. So there was no reimbursement outside the hospital. But the companies went with another system using a kind of negative pressure wound therapy, which is more a dressing branched on a single. It's a single use. There is some aspiration provided by a small engine, and we have several types of single use negative pressure. The problem was that at the beginning the price was so high for these devices that it came to the Canadians, the CNAM and the health insurance system, who said, "Well, we pay a lot for minimum medical devices." And then they decided to discuss with the HAS and to provide, and they finally came to an agreement thanks to a meta-analysis which is written in small letters at the bottom of this slide. Meta-analysis who demonstrated that there was an interest in terms of decreasing the rate of infection in the post-SSI, prevent surgical site infection. So this is recommended now by the WHO, and the insurance system could convince the HAS to change the mode of reimbursement. It's not reimbursed, as Jan said, as a hospitalization system, but now it is included in the LPPR, and it's provided with a price which is fixed. Of course, the company are not completely agreeing with this new price, because the price will be much lower than that they got before. But this is a rule, and it came to a change because there was a high discrepancy between the proposal and the price they could get. So you see that it's a permanent adaptation for a different part of the game.
Okay, so we can also take some examples from peripheral arterial disease, and perhaps one example, the most recent example, is about DCB. DCB means drug-coating balloon. We use this kind of coating balloon, for occlusive disease of the femoral segment to enlarge and to reopen, in fact, the artery. It's a mechanical action of the balloon, but also we release some drug to prevent the restenosis at this level. And so, the first study start in 2014. And if you look here, the main results, in fact, from Medtronic at this period, they first target de novo lesions, so it's the first population, and then they target another kind of population, is the treatment of restenosis. And so in both studies, both RCT, well-done RCT of high level of publication, they show the efficacy of a drug-coating balloon for de novo lesion and for restenotic lesion. So again, take care of the population. But so far, because there is no class effect in this kind of product, because we have different kind of balloon, we have different amount of drug, and we have also different excipient, and so there is no class effect. For these reasons, each DCB, such as Ranger, Lutonix, etc., has run its own, in fact, RCT to show the superiority of the DCB versus POVA, because at this period, the main comparator was balloon angioplasty without any drug. And so each study ran its RCT, each company ran its RCT to show the advantage of the devices. But now, since now 4 years, we didn't use anymore regular angioplasty to treat the patients. And so if you have a new DCB, it's not possible to compare, it's not ethical also, to compare the DCB versus the regular angioplasty. And so what we have to perform if I release a new DCB, in this case, I have to compare the new DCB versus a regular one. And so in this case, I have to launch a non-inferiority study. And so this design is very important because usually when we design a non-inferiority study instead of a superiority study, I need more patients. And so it means that it takes longer often, but also it's costly in comparison to a superiority study. And so what I mean here is the design in terms of inferiority, non-inferiority, or superiority could influence also the data and to obtain the data, the duration to obtain the data. Another example about DCB is a kind of endpoints, primary endpoint and secondary endpoints. We have here two different studies, Impact SFA RCT and the 11-2 RCT. And in fact, both of these studies reach their primary endpoint. In fact, they show in both cases the advantage of the DCB versus the comparator, so the balloon angioplasty, in terms of primary patency at 1 year. But as a secondary endpoint, we have the TLR, that means in fact target lesion reintervention, so the reintervention at the location of the treatment. And what we observe in IMPACT, we observe a significant difference in terms of TLR between the experimental and the control group. Unfortunately, in the 11-2 RCT, we didn't see as a secondary endpoint, the TLR, we didn't see, in fact, an advantage of the Lutonix in terms of TLR versus the control group. And so for these reasons, the CNEDIMS didn't provide the same level of ASA. ASA 3 in IMPACT and ASA 4 in 11-2. And so it influenced also the price given by the CNEDIMS in this case. So, okay. So to define the good endpoint, the good secondary endpoint also could influence the level of reimbursement of the devices. So take care again of the design of the study. Finally, and I finish with this, when you obtain the reimbursement of the product, you have to also to sustain the reimbursement. And for that, the HAS asks for post-marketing follow-up. We know also that it's time-consuming, it's costly to design these post-market studies, but in France, we have the ability, in fact, to obtain many data from the SNDS. Very quickly, in fact, the SNDS, we call that the Système National des Données de Santé. In fact, it's a national database of all the French population, 99%. So it means 65 million of people in the same database. And from this database, we can obtain some socio-demographic data, medical characteristic, type of hospitalization, etc. And it could be helpful also to provide some data to the HIS and to maintain the reimbursement of the product. I can just share with you an example of the power of the SNDS. We ran this study with some colleagues in Nantes University Hospital, just to see, in fact, the safety of paclitaxel devices for SFA treatment. And just between 2011 and 2019, we're able to assess close to 260,000 patients, and it's retrospective, but also prospective up to 2024. So just to show you that using this SNDS, we can obtain data, very large data, and to present this data to the HIS to maintain the reimbursement of the product. And so to conclude both presentations, in fact, you should keep in mind that the French reimbursement is based on evidence-based medicine. This pathway could be enlarged to more European countries, and we expect that it will be more and more based on evidence to get the reimbursement in all in Europe. Medical device CC marking does not imply it's automatic reimbursed in France. CNEDIMS assess the actual benefit of the devices and do not underestimate the key stage in the clinical development to provide the good data and the good clinical evidence. And finally, as we just show, the SNDS could be a powerful tool to assess the medical devices. And so now it's open for question and discussion. If you have any question online, do not hesitate to ask us some question about the reimbursement pathway in France. Luc, any comments? Any question?
No, I confirm that SNDS is very powerful. The problem is to have access to SNDS, which is a little bit protected. But when the medical insurance system has a good access, and for dressings, we did the same evaluation, comparing dressings that were, well, non-optimal, I would say, to optimal dressings. And we used the same data as with SNDS. So I think it's you're right. Coming to a registry, determining something which is not too heterogeneous in criteria of selecting your patients is a good approach. And especially if we are prospective in the study, we could get some information. It's a slow process for them, for the HAS, to move from a very rigid randomized control trial to informations data coming from these registries, but it's slowly coming. Yes.
Ed, perhaps we have some questions online.
Yes, we've got a couple of questions here. First question is, when and how do medical device companies should think about reimbursement requirements? So in the product development stage, where should it be early on, preclinical? Where in that process should the companies be thinking about their reimbursement requirements?
It depends on the, well, I think in a domain like, but Jan will speak about that, in a domain where the medical device is not too well, the game is limited. Means the approach is strictly focused on one pathology. For us in wound healing, there is a lot of different approaches, and this is I see it now. For instance, we have companies providing some lasers, some blue lights, and this is quite difficult to use in the daily practice using the LPPR. So reimbursement for them is not the main target, and they will be, well, more acquired by specific teams specialized in wound healing and used in these teams, and their benefits will be on the ancillary products they will sell. On the contrary, if you speak about a dressing, a new dressing, the focus is really reimbursement for everybody. It means LPPR.
Mm-hmm. Good. And we have another question here, just in France for incentives for innovation. So any experiences, Professor Theo, Professor Golfic, around innovation incentives for med device company?
Jan, you want to comment?
Yes, I think it's not so easy. If you, for example, you apply for forfait innovation, you should be very innovative. If the product is used but not reimbursed and you apply for forfait innovation, it's difficult to get it, I think. And so if you apply for devices, you should ask some dedicated company to assess if you should apply to the forfait innovation Article 51 or whatever. So you should and also you should get in touch with the AGS to ask if with a pre-meeting if you can apply or not. So and you should be advised, in fact.
I would comment on that, because you see, there is a kind of gap somewhere. France is well known to enhance and have a lot of incentive for fundamental research in SAM, CNRS. So designing a prototype is not so complex. Well, because it's a public funding, and there is a lot of public funding. but the transition between the prototype and the commercialization and launching is for us is difficult because there is some money problems and funding which are, well, it's increasing, it's better now, but it's still a difficulty for a young startup to really demonstrate from prototype to series how to and there is here a kind of well, difficulty for them to provide the level of evidence which is needed by the HAS. In some way, for some medical devices, the bar is too high, and there is no possibility for them to be reimbursed. So this is why most of the startup products will be acquired by big companies, big pharma, and they will try to either they block the new one, or they develop it and they put money behind.
Great, thanks. We have one final question here before we wrap up. What would you say are the three most important topics to be evaluated by French authorities for reimbursement of a medical device today, in your opinion?
Yeah.
There is not one response. When you have to design an RCT or a study, you should find a balance between the most valuable endpoints, the smaller population, in order to decrease the cost and the length, the duration of the study, and also the best comparator, in fact, to provide evidence also for physician. And so I think that, and Luc, you said it, if you can have a pre-meeting with the HAS to submit the design and the purpose of the study, I think do it. It's very important to have this open discussion with the HAS before launching this type of study, because if, according to the results and the conclusion of the study, you are not able to provide enough evidence, you lose time and money.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, agree.
Good. Well, I think that wraps up our session for today. So again, thank you very much, Professor Govic and Professor Theo, for this informative session. It's been very informative, and thank you, audience, for joining and participating. We hope you found it informative as well. And with that, we will close this meeting. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.